Hello, welcome to the first installment of See True Café. I am Dagogo Hart from WeareGriot, and on this installment, we'll be talking about the evolution of theatre in Ireland. Today, I have the wonderful thespian, actor, director, producer, Deirdre Molloy, who I've personally had the pleasure of working with as well. And we're also going to be speaking to Dylan Coburn Gray, who's the wonderful all-round theatre maker with Malaprop, playwright as well, numerous awards and grants, all that good stuff. So we have loads of experience in the room today, in the virtual Zoom room anyway. So yeah, welcome Deirdre, welcome Dylan. How are you doing today?
Great. Hello. How are you doing?
Good. Lovely to be here.
Thank you very much. So guys, today, like I said, we'll be talking about the evolution of theatre in Ireland, specifically between the generations of Deirdre and Dylan, and everything that's kind of happened in between, and where we are now as an art form in the country anyway. So starting with yourself, Deirdre, I know now you're the chair of the board of Dublin Youth Theatre. So what was your experience like when you were a member of DYT?
Well, it was obviously in many ways very different to how it is now, because I'm really old and there was no internet back then. So I think, like the evolution of the internet and smartphones has changed a lot about how young people communicate and make art, and especially within lockdown, all the different digital ways that you can make theatre. And DYT have really worked hard at trying to make that to continue to make that happen for the members. The thing is that Dublin Youth Theatre has never really changed in terms of its goals and objectives. It was set up by Paddy O'Dwyer and Eilish Mullen, the powerhouse that was Eilish Mullen, who's unfortunately died since. And the mission was to provide for the personal and social development of its members through drama workshops and productions. And Paddy was always really insistent that DYT is a youth club, first and foremost. That's what DYT does. So it's not about training young people, it's about developing them as people. And I think that DYT, from when it was first set up to my time, to Dylan's time, to now, that is essentially what DYT does. And it certainly changed my life. It's because of DYT that I do what I do, and probably I am who I am. So technology has changed things for young people as DYT members, but the heart of what DYT does has not changed, which is, I think, a really special thing and what is special about DYT.
Yeah, that is that. I can definitely resonate with that. I know I didn't go to DYT personally, but I think when something like that exists as, firstly, a youth club, something that is more of a family, something more social, the professional development kind of just comes naturally with that. And how about yourself, Dylan? When you were with DYT, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, sort of interesting to have this conversation now, because it's more than a decade since I joined. So sort of I can remember the feeling, but I suppose just look at it very differently now, because I think the year I joined, I think it was the year there'd just been sort of huge arts funding cuts. So I think sort of lots of the grown-ups were really scrambling and panicked and scared. And so I think sort of in that funny way, when you're younger and, that sort of seeps into your bones, even if you don't know that it's doing that. I think sort of sometimes there was a slightly panicky sense in the atmosphere that you had to pick a style or a thing to do, and then get really good at that, and that's how you knew, you'd sort of have your art thing sorted out. And then the really lovely thing was in DYT, there was a little bit of that. But actually what you also had was you had all sorts of different facilitators from all sorts of different disciplines coming in and saying, well, if you're more interested in doing story-oriented stuff, here's that. If you're more interested in doing sort of physical or movement-based work, then here's that. And if you're interested in doing sort of thinky stuff with technology, then there's also that. And I sort of think, yeah, so I feel like with sort of a little more adult context, it feels like it was a time of big change, maybe for the people we were working with. And they did the thing you always hope that grown-ups will do, and they cushion you from the really, really hard bits, and they sort of give you the best of what's going on. So, yeah, I think I find it hard to isolate a particular artistic current from that moment when I was joining, partly because there were so many, and that was what was so exciting about it. And I sort of think, yeah, so that actually by centering the welfare, that, you know, one of the things that means is, I suppose, giving young people choice, you know, giving them the tools to work things out for themselves, you know, which is that real sort of community and developmental minded ethos, rather than make a show on which your entire self-worth will depend, you know. Not so much that thing.
Yeah. And speaking of young people, actually, Dylan, because I know you work with young people at the moment as well. So how has that time that you spent in DYT kind of like shaped how you work with young people now yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of that thing of, I think like Dee was saying, it does just get into your blood, you know, so that, and you never really escape. So that when you stop being a young person yourself, you find reasons to sort of still be in the world, you know, and you just switch hats, you know, you go from being a participant to being a leader. And for me, those two were very close together. I think it was the space of 6 months. It was sort of a very crucial 6 month transition when I was 21, when I went from being an old young person to being a young grown up. But I think the thing I really took forward was something about community and maybe audience. Because I think what was lovely was the chance. I was inactive sort of as a member for a good few years of my time in DYT. You know, I joined 2007 and only really started doing stuff in like 2010, 2011. But it was the fact that we were getting to do it for ourselves and sort of make our own choices and to write parts that would be really good for this person and that would really make this specific audience laugh. And I think still with Malaprop, for us, sort of the question, who is it for, comes before what is it? And sort of that sense in a way that style is very often something that sort of you don't have to fuss. You don't sit down and ever decide what style you're going to write in or what your style is. That sort of just happens while you're worrying about offering something that'll be of interest to the people you have in front of you, and that will be satisfying and challenging and interesting for the people you're working with to work on, you know? So that actually, if you look after the people, sort of the art side, or lots of the arts decisions sort of make themselves. I feel that's really rooted in youth theatre, you know, maybe the ideals of, to boil all that down, of like maybe situatedness and responsivity, you know. You don't want all of your shows to be the same because they don't all happen in the same place, not always seen by the same people.
That's such an important question that we have to ask ourselves, isn't it? Like, who is the art for, regardless of the art form, even sometimes. Who is your audience? Who is going to be best impacted by this thing that you're making? I know you spoke about when you were still in DYT, how you kind of have to like choose one part that you're good at, or one part basically, and try and get really good at it. So I was going to channel this to Deirdre, because I know Deirdre does directing, producing, acting, basically do everything. So how did your time at DYT kind of like shape you into doing all these different things that you're doing now, essentially? Because you're not just doing one thing.
I think you know, along the lines of what Dylan is saying, is you're encouraged in DYT to try out a lot of different things, and there are members who just aren't performers, who like to work behind the scenes a bit more. And you know, I was in every show that I could possibly be in while I was a member of DYT, but I was also like really interested in, I loved the workshops. I loved I just loved everything. I was really interested in the design aspect of things, the stage management aspect, and directing came, like the first show that I directed on my own was Dublin Youth Theatre, one act that I devised with the company, and Philly McMahon was in the cast, and you know, that our kind of friendship and working relationship forged during that time. So even though I was no longer a member of DYT and I was directing the show, I was still very young. So I was trying out new and interesting things with these young people who just had brilliant minds, and thinking, God, was I even half as good as them when I was in DYT in terms of like making stuff up and coming up with ideas? And, you know, I find young people's minds incredible in terms of how they create and how they imagine. They seem to have no boundaries. There's no glass ceiling with them. They can do whatever it is that they want to do. And it's, you know, it's back to that thing that Dylan said, you know, that there are a group of adults who are looking after that space for them to create that. And now I'm one of the adults who's in charge of that aspect of things. And it's like, you feel a huge responsibility in that, because having experienced it and having, you know, I've kind of gone off the question, but the truth is I do all of the things that I do partly out of necessity, because it's very hard to make a living as just an artist in theatre. It's almost impossible. So you learn to do all of the other things. So producing, I find producing really difficult, but I love it at the same time. It's not something that I think I do naturally, but I learned under the best producer in Jenny Jennings of This Is Pop Baby when we did Riot. So it's all just really connected, you know. Being a member of DYT, as Dylan said, you never really leave. You never, like Dylan is still really involved with writing workshops with the young people. I still go back and facilitate workshops every now and again. You know, I joined the board 4 or 5 years ago, I think, and now I'm chair of the board. I feel, and I think a lot of ex-DYTers feel, a responsibility to the continuation of making that thing happen for other people that happened for us, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So speaking on the audience aspect now, how would you say, because I know you said the young people you find, I know you are just, because I know you're amazing at what you do, but you said the young people now, their minds are so different from what your mind would have been like when you were there. So how would you say the audience has changed in that time as well, from when you were in DYT, or you just being a young theater maker yourself? How has the audience kind of evolved to what it is now in terms of their expectation or their response to the work and stuff like that?
I think yes is the answer, and also no, in that you know, I've been lucky that as an actor, I've done a lot of mainstream theater. I've done a lot of shows in the Abbey, and then I've got, you know, I grew up into acting at a time when there was just like this wealth of regional theaters, and I worked all around the country. I worked in the UK doing shows, you know, playing great roles in really exciting shows, and did a really good mix of like very fringy stuff, very experimental stuff, and then, you know, like main stage Abbey stuff, which would be seen, I suppose, as a bit safer in general. And I think there's always been an audience that will watch the mainstream stuff, you know, that will they'll go and see everything that goes on in the Grand Canal, the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre. They'll go and see you know, there's an audience that will go and see everything that happens in the Abbey, everything that happens in the Gate, everything that happens by Druid, everything that happens by Malaprop. You know, each theatre company and space and house has their own audience. But then there's also an audience who just love experimental stuff and love new, exciting, cutting edge theatre that is just, you know, along the lines of what we did with Boy Child. We created a genre of spoken word theatre that brought a whole new audience in to see theatre, and that's something I'm really proud of, and I feel really privileged to have done with you guys. And I went on then to do Raven and the Crone, which was a similar style of theatre. I was working with spoken word artists who and we made a play out of their spoken word pieces and their poetry. And you know, in that way, we're bringing a new audience into theatre, and I think that's not the most important thing, but I think it's a really important thing. I think it's something that This Is Pop Baby do. It's something that Malaprop do in a really lovely way, in that, you know, we're kind of going, you look like you might be interested in a night of really great entertainment. Why don't you come along and see this? And I also think, you know, with Malaprop and Pop Baby, part of what they do, both those companies do really well, is they, as Dylan said, they know their audience. They know who they want to come and see this show, and they know how to point them out and go, come here, you're going to like this. And I think that is now, whether we like it or not, a massive part of theatre is marketing, figuring out who your audience is and making them think that it's really important, making them realize that it's really important that they come and see this piece of theatre.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that regards to Boy Child as well, actually. And so Dylan, because I know with Malaprop you do a lot of experimental, cutting edge stuff. So for yourself, how has the response been, or what has been the pushback, or do you think you've lost some audience members, or you could have been at a different place if you did traditional theatre? That I'm basically asking like 4 or 5 questions, but basically I'm just trying to see what the response in general, in all aspects, has been to your kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the whole company. I know for myself, I sort of made a semi-principled decision, which is also just like purely a personal taste thing. I think maybe 2 years ago, which was to stop using the word experimental and to start using the word playful instead, because I think it just suggests a different relationship to style. Because I think there's a great irony in a way, which is, you know, like avant-gardism is a really, really sort of complex historical phenomenon, because, you know, it comes in at this point where suddenly the arts are sort of being integrated into a larger economy, and, you know, where art is becoming more of a commodity rather than a thing that just exists or only exists under sort of conditions of like patronage, you know. And avant-gardism is sort of this it's a really ironic thing, you know, because it's all about it's about the excitement for the new, and I think we all do feel excited about newness a lot of the time, but then avant-gardism sort of turns that into the only thing of value, you know, which is things are only good in as much as they're new or shiny. And then I sort of think the first huge irony with that is that that's actually, you know, a cult of newness that ends up being really sort of traditional, you know, or reactionary. You know, it becomes really obsessed with the past because you have to think loads about the past to make sure you're not doing anything that's been done before. So you've got these people who really want to leap into the future and spend all of their time sitting there maybe paralyzed going, oh God, I can't do a monologue because monologue's been done before. Oh my God, I can't do holding a microphone because holding a microphone has been done before. Oh my God, I can't do sort of expressionistic dance bits because expressionistic dance bits have been done before. So it can be quite, I think, like a paralyzing mindset to get into. And I think it is really bound up with like the economics of it, because it's when you're thinking about it as a commodity that it becomes really important to be able to say, I was the first person to do that, therefore I'm the person you should pay for having done that. And so sort of I feel like experimentals sometimes has this weird subtext, which is like style is a race you're trying to win. You know, that the most important thing to get there is to get there first. And actually, I sort of think playful. I prefer to think maybe of style as a game, because also it implies that you can play different games at different times, and the aim isn't to win, but sort of to see what happens. Do you know? So it's a little less directional, and partly that comes down to, sorry, that's like kind of a broad, you know, sort of thinky background to like a really simple question, which is like, what do people make of our work? But part of that is down to like, we've got, I think, 4 or 5 shows now, one of which people haven't seen because it got put on ice at the start of the pandemic. But, you know, when you have 4 or 5 shows, people sort of know what to expect. You know, they sort of go, or they think they know what to expect. They come along going, oh, well, it'll probably be a bit like that other thing I liked. And that's sort of a funny contract, because in a way you want to deliver on it, but also the one thing you can't do is just deliver what people know to expect, because they don't like that either. So it has to be a bit new and has to be a bit the same. And I sometimes think, I think Dee, you hit on something really interesting there, which was the difference maybe between, or maybe, yeah, a really important thing when we talk about, you know, audiences getting more accepting, and you sort of go, well, which audience? Do you know, like, is it actually that there's an audience who are ready for anything? Or I think, is it maybe just that I think actually it's gotten easier for audiences to sort of hyper specify? Because, you know, I think people's work is more available now. There is more documentation in some senses of theatre work there, where you can track people on social media or this, that, and the other, and sort of go, oh, that seems like the type of thing I'd like. And, you know, what you might have is paradoxically someone whose taste is narrower than someone than an audience, your typical audience member in the 90s, who sort of went to see what was on, not knowing much about it. Whereas actually, I think when you've got like intensive marketing through social media and stuff, you can know more about the shows and sort of hyper curate a very, very specific palette for yourself. So maybe just to sum up, what I'd say is Malaprop sort of have a loyal audience who come to see our shows because they know they'll get something a bit nerdy and a bit funny and a bit weird. Sort of our 3 thematic watchwords, or like stylistic watchwords, are cool, gas, and spooky. We sort of try to hit all of those bases most of the time. And then I suppose we've just gotten resigned to the fact that there's some people who don't like that, and they consistently don't review our work well. And sort of our revenge is not caring. Because it's like, of course you didn't like it. You were never going to like it. And then I suppose the thing to hold on to maybe is that actually is to not get too hung up on the promise of the rep, which is that, you know, if we wanted tomorrow to make a show that's totally different for us, if we wanted to make a verbatim show with no jokes, if we wanted to make a dance show working with choreographers, I hope we'd feel brave enough to do that, even if in some senses that was more traditional, because it was less of the typical blend of things we do and more recognizably just a show in that style. But it would be a huge experiment for us. You know, I sort of think that's an important distinction, which is experimental for the style overall versus experimental for the artist who's doing it, if that makes sense. All around the world on that one.
I love hearing you talk like that, Dylan, just because I'm a massive admirer of your work, but also like your mom, who is a founder member of Barabbas, which was, you know, in my generation of theatre makers, was the most experimental and most exciting new company. And I was so lucky to have done, I think, 5 shows and numerous workshops with Barabbas. And I feel really proud to have been like a kind of a, you know, going from being one of their ferociously loyal audience members to being a company member of Barabbas, and that was that they were so that, you know, like cutting edge, avant-garde, whatever you want to say, but their work was playful. And that, you know, for that to be your key word, I just think is amazing. Because
and really interestingly, because again, my perspective on this is very different because I was a child for most of this. But I think one of the very first Barabbas shows I was allowed to see and was of an age to see was Moby Dan. And sort of interestingly, I think, you know, although actually was Moby Dan a Barabbas show, wasn't it? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
But certainly it was Veronica, my mother's first like play. And in that sense, you could view that as, you know, sort of, what would you call it? A step backwards for the company, because it wasn't physical. It wasn't this, you know, in the same way. You know, there was a script. There was a thing that was recognizably a script. You know, there were people who were characters and they talked to each other. But in another sense, it was totally new ground for Veronica and by extension for the company. And I sort of think sometimes that's the more important thing, is to worry less about, you know, does this push the overall envelope? Because like also what envelope, you know, the Irish envelope, the international envelope, and more sort of, does it push my personal envelope? Have I done this before? Am I excited and a bit scared to do this? I think,
but also like with Barabbas, and I suspect from the Malaprop shows that I've seen, there was that ferociously loyal audience that I talk about. Like I was a member of that audience, and as was my mother. My mother just would not miss a Barabbas show for anything. She just adored the three founder members and everything that they made, and just loved seeing them on stage. And that, you know, I mean, I think that says a huge amount about the type of work that they did, that the connection that was there for people of two very different generations with two very different mindsets, just like wouldn't miss a Barabbas show. And I think every, you know, doesn't every company want to be the company that you know, that everybody audience member of, you know, everybody wants to see it. I think any young company that's coming up, like you guys, you know, should be really proud of the fact that you have managed to engage an audience and have a loyal following. That, you know, because people are so flighty nowadays, and it's so easy to, like, you know, start watching a series on Netflix, get bored, move over to watch a movie. You're on your phone, on social media while you're doing it. It's, you know, to get to have managed to engage audiences to come and watch plays, you know, because theatre does get bad rep within the arts. It's kind of like there are a lot of cool young people who kind of go, theatre, what? Why would I go to that? You know,
yeah,
until people like Malaprop or people like Emmett Kerwin and Philly McMahon, you know, put together. What was Emmett's show? Dublin Old School.
Yeah.
You know, that until shows like that started to be made, there was a massive young audience that just thought theatre was shit.
Oh yeah. Well, sort of related to that, there's a brilliant book I sort of wanted to shout out, and I'm leaning out of view because I think I might actually have it right here under my bed. And yes, I do. Which is Lot by Shola von Reinhold, who's this super interesting Black Scottish novelist. And there's an amazing moment in that, because it's sort of talking about that thing of, you know, when an art form is out of fashion, or which is generally as well where the people who are really hung up on newness start saying things like, it's dead, theatre's dead, or, you know, the naturalistic play is dead. And Shola von Reinhold in that book invents a painter who has a great comment, which is, whenever someone says painting is dead, what we should all mentally replace that with is white people shouldn't be allowed paint anymore. And the point they're sort of making is that thing of, actually, when we think we're talking about a style, we're talking about who has had the opportunity to make use of that style. And actually, I sort of think the really liberating thing there is that art forms don't die. They just sort of shift their center of interest and who's interested in using them. And I think that's what you're talking about there, Dee, is that, like, from generation to generation, someone's going to be picking up sort of stylistic tools that are a bit dusty or whatever, and I suppose using them to think new thoughts, or to think the thoughts that are urgent and pressing and sort of complex and fascinating for them. So actually, yeah, when we talk about style, we're really talking again about audience and maker, and the relationship between audience and maker. And that book is fab. I would say everyone read it.
Wonderful. I'll definitely be checking it out. And so I'll start with you, Deirdre, but I have the same question for you as well, Dylan. So what would you say is the biggest driver, or what would you say, because I know you said, Dylan, 2 years ago, you kind of like stopped using the word experimental, started using the word playful. So what would you say are the biggest like impacts or drivers? Is it audience? Is it personal experience that make you shift your mindset into how you create to become more playful or more experimental, or whatever word you want to use to describe it? What are the drivers and the impacts for that kind of mind shift?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't have an answer, in that I am what we call an interpretive artist. I don't. I write, but my writing, I do a lot of the directing that I do is new, fringe, unusual theatre, and most of the people that I've worked with, because a lot of them would be young or new writers, call me the unwriter. So I would it's, you know, there's a bit of dramaturgy, there's a bit of editing, there's a bit of you know, jiggling things around, and I don't create from scratch as such. I am influenced by the scripts that are brought to me, both as a performer and as a director. You know, when Philly McMahon brought me Danny and Chantel Still Here, 10 years after myself and Philly made Wake Up Sleeping Beauties for the DYT show that I directed, I just, you know, you just pick up a script and you're like 2 pages in, just going, I am so excited about this. This is going to be one of the best pieces of theatre in the world, and I've been asked to be involved in that. And it was just an exceptional piece of theatre, and it was so experimental and cutting edge and playful, and, you know, whatever words you want to use. What influences me is what is brought to me by creative artists. All artists are creative, sorry, by artists who have started from scratch, which is something that in my head someday I'm going to do, but I you know, I probably never will, because I'm lucky enough that amazing writers and theatre makers have come to me and gone, will you help me to make this in some way, shape or form, whether it's as a producer or a director or an actor. And then I'm given these gifts of these incredible scripts, and I'm just really lucky in that I've never been asked to direct something and I've read it and gone, no, that's not for me. I think people just know that what I do as a director and what's most important to me is that I walk into, and again, I would say this is very much coming from DYT, I walk into a rehearsal room with no set ideas in place. No, that's wrong. Of course I have ideas in place, but I never go in with, this is the way that this show has to be. I go in to a room with a group of people that I know are going to be brilliant and bring things to the table. And then I take those things that they brought and I mold them and sculpt them but it's always coming out of the collaboration. It's always coming from everybody's ideas in the room coming together and making something together. So it's, I'm not the one who's the person in charge. I'm the guide as such. I'm the outside eye that is saying, I think this will work better if we do it that way that you did it before, or we need to keep trying this because it's not quite getting to what it needs to be. So yeah, sorry, what drives me and influences me is brilliant scripts being brought to me or ideas being brought to me, like Boy Child, like Danny and Chantel Still Here, like, you know, I directed a musical that Roger Gregg wrote years ago called The Stuff of Myth, which again was like a massive success, and it was different and unusual and weird, and we didn't set out to make that. That's just what it became. So I guess that's the kind of work that I do, and I think that people who know my work as a director know that's the kind of thing that Dee would be good at. Let's give her that and see what she makes of it, along with the company.
As you were speaking there, you just reminded me of the bits in Boy Child where you had us doing the same movement at the same time, and I was like, how does she think of this? But then when you look at it, when you look at the video of it, and everybody in the middle of all of us just acting like we're trying to portray real life situations, everyone's doing the same movement, and it looks so beautiful.
That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, though. I didn't think of that. you did a movement that you did that at one stage during one of your poems, and you repeated it every time you did it. You repeated it, and I was just like, that's just so gorgeous, and it should be echoed by the company. So I didn't come up with that. I watched you do something, and I went and I developed it into something that was a little bit bigger and gave a bit of style to the piece, I suppose. So that's an absolutely perfect example of what I'm talking about, is that I'm not coming up with things. I'm watching really carefully what's being done in front of me and going, that is brilliant. Let's keep that, or let's do something extra and interesting with that. So I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because it's exactly what I'm talking about.
Genius, absolute genius. So how about yourself, Dylan? So what would you say? So do you, like, when you want to start creating something new, do you go sit down, okay, I want to create something new, or do you just live your life and then things come to you and then that sparks the creation, or how does it work?
I'm really having to fight I'm sort of flashing back to my secondary school self, where I was the kid who pretended he hadn't done the homework, so as to fit in. And I think in my adult life, the version of that is, I think most writers have a really, really sort of anxious relationship to writing, and I sort of sometimes join in just so as not to look like as much of a swat as I am, in fact, because I love writing, and actually, it's just the thing I like to do, and I sort of find it easy enough to keep a couple of things on the boil that I can be excited about and sort of be slotting things into at once. So I think I never really have to sit down and sort of go, oh God, make something new. And so I think it's very rare that I get stuck. I sort of had one big enough bout of like being totally stuck, and in that, like, I just didn't feel like I knew how to be interested in anything, and because I didn't know how to be interested, I didn't know how to be interesting. But actually that was in 2018, and that was sort of related to like sort of a big workplace argy-bargy thing I was involved in. And so actually it's the classic thing of sometimes if you can't write, it's not about the writing, it's sort of about your whole life and everything that's going on. It's just not the right time to be writing. So I think for me, the bit where I sit down is normally about, it's the right time for this idea, you know? And that's sort of the nice thing too, which is there's 4 or 5 things I'd love to be talking about right now. I've been wanting to make a show about this historical episode for a while. I've been wanting to make a show about this really interesting internet phenomenon. I've been wanting to make a show about this subculture. But actually, I think the thing that other people are going to really respond to and be really surprised and sort of interested in, the one that sort of resonates in this moment, that I think has the potential to sort of ripple really far, is this idea. So that's the one we're going to put front and center. I suppose for me, picking projects more than sort of coming up with projects, because, you know, the coming up with them is the easy part. You know, I think it's just be interested in stuff. That's sort of the bit of my job I like the best, is feeling like people pay me, not very much, but like at its best, writing is people paying you to go off and sort of just be interested in stuff. And I can't remember who, someone has a good description that way, that writers are professional amateurs, you know. Their job is just to sort of pay attention and then trick someone else into paying them to pay attention. Yeah, so when it's about picking the project, it's often about sort of what's the right project for right now. Not so much in terms of things I've never done before. And actually, maybe like a specific example is I did a show in 2016, which was quite conceptual and weird, and it's gotten some of the best and some of the worst reviews I've ever gotten. Actually, no, it has gotten definitely the worst review I ever got. And in that way of like, you just don't read the ones from people who you feel were always going to hate it. And I had managed not to read it until my partner's dad came to see the show. And after the show, he came up to me and went, I really liked that. And I went, oh, thank you. That really means a lot. And he went, I didn't think you were pretentious and self-satisfied at all. And then obviously I had to read the review just to see what it had said. But that was just great. But then I wrote sort of 3 or 4 other shows after that, and they were sort of in a more conventionally plotty style. You know, there were characters talking to each other. But then one of them was also City Song, you know, which is a big poem play, and then that won a big award. So I think if you look at my career from the outside, it goes Weird Show 2016. Some people were like, what the fuck is this? And then 2017 and 2018, 2019, 2020, there's loads of shows with characters. But actually, it's not that I drifted away from writing that show. It's just I haven't felt like a crush on an idea like that in a while. And then actually the last play I wrote was another one of those. I just sort of, it just took me 5 years to cycle back to being excited by that type of work, or to have a specific idea I wanted to work on, and where I felt the time and the forum and everything were right. So I sort of think, yeah, part of the success for me is about keeping lots of things hopping and waiting to see what people are going to respond to.
And Dylan, to look at things from a, well, let's say, less positive side, for you, what are the biggest challenges to making the kind of work that you want to make? Like, especially like outside influences, not necessarily the challenge of you as a writer personally, but in terms of outside influences like political influences or the audience or the environment that you live in, what for you are the biggest challenges that you find to creating the kind of work that you want to create? Even though I know it hasn't stopped you, but what are the biggest challenges for you?
Yeah, I mean, to start from a really concrete example, the one that sort of jumps to my head is I have a script for a male Taiwanese Irish actor in his 30s that's been sitting in my desk drawer since 2018, because sort of that casting just hasn't really existed yet. I won't say it doesn't exist, because again, I think whenever we say, those people aren't there, what we actually mean is those people haven't been given jobs, And that was sort of interesting, because that play is not my experience, but it was me sort of inventing a person whose experience spoke to sort of my family in a slightly sideways, interesting way. And then we just haven't had the chance to produce it. So actually, I sort of think beyond, feeling like actually talking about sort of Ireland beyond white Ireland, I think what we're talking about beyond representation on stage, we're talking about who's getting paid. And a matter of who's getting paid is also a matter of like sort of what people are writing so that people can get paid, which is a matter of who's doing the writing. And then that's also a matter of who's being commissioned. And then that's also a matter of who's doing the commissioning. So I sort of think there's this lag between sort of the stories that people want to tell and then sort of the institutional thumbs up to those stories, and who's going to be interested in them. So I sort of think, yeah, it's like the economics of representation is a thing I'm running up against a fair bit. And then maybe related to that also, and I sort of feel like it's too easy just to get together and complain about funding. And actually, I want to say that I feel personally that in the last year or so, there's been brilliant responsivity from the Arts Council in terms of addressing, I suppose, the way the funding ecology has worked for a long time. But certainly, I think sort of when I was starting to get Arts Council funding, something we were running up against was how modular it was. And so sort of even if you get funding, you feel like you're having to start from scratch every time you want to do something. And that actually your ability to get funding was closely tied to your track record. So there was this disincentive to actually engage in experiments, really paradoxically, even if you were an experimental theatre maker. Because if you did a show, if you got funding for a show that went really well, next time you went to get funding, there's a strong pressure to say, and we promise this show will be like that show and people will like it for the same reasons, rather than we want to do something totally unknown, which is an unknown quantity and might not actually, generate as good a return. So I sort of think, yeah, the modularity and the importance then that a track record, or quite a narrow version of track record, assumes, which is about your ability to prove, your ability to make good on any money you're given. Because actually it discourages people from the right turns and, the U-turns actually that I think are really healthy. The ability to go, I've never done something like this before and I really want it. So that's sort of two things, but they both come down to money, money, money.
Very well said. Definitely the same in my experience as well. Yeah. My producer's in my ear, so I'll just round up. But I have one last question for Deirdre, which is kind of along the same lines, but to look at things from a positive side then, Deirdre, how would you say, not necessarily fix the problem, but in your experience and how you've seen things get better and better and better, how would you say we can keep getting better and keep improving and keep being able to represent these different sort of art forms, the newer art forms, the alternative, the playful, what would you say is the things that we should definitely do and the things that we definitely shouldn't do?
I absolutely think the key is keep letting new people in, keep allowing new voices to come through, keep, you know, like don't always do the same thing. And I mean that like for the theater world generally, the arts world generally, keep you know, when I first saw Felicia perform, my mind was blown. And we were at a repeal gig, myself and Philly and Jenny were at a repeal gig, and just the voice was so new and different, and it was just so exciting to see a young Nigerian woman like on the stage with all these Irish people, these white Irish people, speaking, giving poetry that was so strong and fresh and mind-blowing. And then to get to work with you and her together, like when I came to see your show, See True, See True, See True,
See True.
like to hear your work and to hear your voice, and I was just like, this is what Ireland needs now. It needs all of the new voices. We all need to be listening and open and excited about and going to see the new voices and hearing what they have to say. And that is the key to keeping, I believe, to keeping art alive and to keeping theatre alive. And the scare, I mean, it always just comes back to money, doesn't it? I like what Dylan was talking about, like that point when the recession hit and arts funding was cut, and basically through no fault of their own. Like, it's really easy to arts council bash, but they're good people and they really want good art to be made. But a thing happened at that time, which was basically regional theatre and experimental theatre was kind of decimated because everything had to be a success. Everything had to do well. So nobody was taking any chances, because that's the way the Arts Council were pushing people, because that's the way they had to go, because they had no money to give to people to make back in a better position. And awful as the pandemic has been, the additional funding that has come in has meant that people can start to really mess around with shit again and try new things and try exciting new things. And I think one of the great massive explosion of brilliant, new, crazy, experimental and interesting work that I can't wait to see and hopefully be a part of.
Wow, thank you very, very much to both of you. You have dropped like a lot of gems today, a lot of nice gems. I really thoroughly enjoyed this interview. But I suppose, just to summarize from my own point of view, from being a member of the WeareGriot team, I think in terms of the evolution of theatre in Ireland, I'm not necessarily part of the theatre scene, but just in terms of the evolution of the arts in general in Ireland, it's something I've been very, very proud of, especially since moving to Dublin, where we started from personally and what it was like then. And like you said yourself, this pandemic, there's been a lot of fun, and the things I've been seeing been going on, even with the lockdown. People have been doing a lot of really experimental stuff, and I've just seen loads of really good arts and loads of different artists pop up, and it's been wonderful to watch. So thank you guys very much for your time, and thank you guys for listening. And yes, this has been See True Café. I am Dagogo Hart. Thank you very much, Deirdre Molloy. Thank you very much, Dylan Coburn Gray. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.